childhood was spent in a beautiful neighborhood full of trees and nice homes in Meadville, Pennsylvania. We were in town, but it felt like we lived in the woods because our huge front and backyards were both filled with trees and bushes. Actually, the name of the street we lived on was Forest Avenue, and I always thought that described it perfectly. When I was 8 years old, I was outside more than in, mostly in our backyard, and I remember there was an old fallen log in our backyard that I liked to sit on and play around. I was more of a tomboy back then because I liked to catch bugs and feed wildlife and play in the dirt and rocks. I really had no interest in dressing up or playing with dolls. One evening before dinner, I was in the back playing on that log and a bird landed right next to me. I didn't know what kind of bird it was then, but I do now, and it was a black-capped chickadee. All I knew is that it was small and it had cute little white cheeks on its face. It had landed on a dead branch only a foot or two away from me, and I remember trying to stay still because I didn't want to scare it and make it fly away. That same bird came back over and over again, almost daily, and I would see it all the time after that. It must have gotten very comfortable with me because it started to land on the actual log just inches away from me where I could have picked it up if I wanted to. I would always stay still though and let it do whatever it wanted to. I was pretty young, but one of the things I remember most about this little bird was that it would look right at me when I would say things to it and even tilt its head like a dog does, but it really kept eye contact. It made me feel special, like I was different or interesting, so I started bringing pieces of bread with me, and after doing that for a while, it would eat out of my hand. I don't really remember how long this went on, but after it had gotten comfortable with me feeding it, I would follow the bird when it'd jump off the log and hop back into the deeper trees. I used to think it had a family it was going back to. I know I never followed it that far away from my house, but there was a small clearing in the trees where for some reason I would lose the bird every time. So when I'd get to that spot, I would just turn around and go back to the house. This probably went on for half of the summer, so not too long, but definitely long enough to remember. Then one day, the bird stopped coming around. I'm sure I was sad about it, but I don't really remember much after that. Even though it was only a short piece of my childhood, I never forgot about the bird, and it became one of those few core memories that I always hung on to. About 4 years after this, I had another experience with the same species of bird. I woke up really early one morning, again in the summer, and it was right when the sky was starting to get light. I've never been an early riser, so this was already weird for me, but my window had been cracked open all night, and another chickadee landed on the outer windowsill, actually touching my screen, and stared into my room. I was around 12 then, so I knew it wasn't the same bird from when I was younger, but it did give me a very familiar feeling, and it stayed there watching me. It even let me come up to the screen and talk to it for a minute before it flew away. This might not sound like anything more than a random bird showing up, but to me it felt like it had deliberately come to see me, and I can't really explain why I felt that way. Those were my two experiences growing up. They weren't extraordinary or even exciting really, they were just notable encounters with the same species of bird, and that seemed unique. I carried those memories with me into my adult life, but aside from always having a place in my heart for chickadees, it was never something I thought about. About 20 years later, when I was in my early 30s, my friend and I had taken our kids up to Woodcock Lake, not far from where I grew up. We both had our kids in strollers and were on a walk later in the afternoon. Somewhere along the trail, I had stopped for a second to grab a sippy cup out of the back of the stroller for my daughter, and while I was crouched down behind it, another chickadee landed on the actual handle of the stroller. When I looked up, it was only a foot from my face. It startled me, but I smiled automatically because it felt like running into someone from my past. The friend I was with even said she saw it flying toward me and thought it was going to land on my head. I stayed there crouched on the ground and was looking at it right in the eyes, and I don't know what happened, but this massive rush of deja vu came over me. I felt it through my entire body, and it made me remember things from when I was young, and some of the things I had never remembered until that second. The very first thing that came to me is that when I would follow this bird into the trees as a little girl, it wasn't just me curiously wandering with it, it was much more intentional. Then I got a strong feeling that that bird hadn't just appeared on its own by happenstance. It had been there on purpose and was directing me. Then a memory came into my head that I had never had before. I remembered that when I would follow it deeper into the trees, the woods around me would change. I could picture the trees perfectly spaced from each other like they were planted down a hallway, and all of the forest and neighborhood sounds would go away until it was just quiet and I was standing in that small open area. I also knew that I wasn't alone there. I don't remember seeing any faces or details. I only know that there were other larger figures around me and they were like adults. It was the strongest and strangest feeling of being surrounded by other presences that were standing still, and even as a child I understood that they were not animals or other people. It dawned on me that the bird wasn't the focus of these memories at all. The figures that were there with me were the focus, and the bird was what brought me to them. This rush of feelings was so intense that I fell back from the stroller and ended up on my butt in the gravel, which made the bird on the handle fly away. The only thought I had was, how could I have forgotten this? It was like I had always known what actually happened when I would follow the bird, but had chosen to forget it. I remember my friend coming over to help me up because she thought something was wrong, but I couldn't even begin to tell her what I was actually feeling, so I didn't say anything and tried to laugh it off like I had lost my balance. As we finished our walk, I barely remember anything between the bird landing on the stroller and getting to the car because I was so confused. I could not believe I had forgotten this giant crazy thing that used to happen every time I would follow the bird when I was young. It must have happened 10 times, and it left me with huge questions about who these figures in the forest were and what had actually happened to me. One of my best friends has heard me talk about this many times, and she wonders if there were older kids or even neighbors back there that I'm not remembering correctly. I am positive it wasn't either of those, because when I picture myself standing in that clearing, I can almost see them again, and they don't look like people. They look more like thin shadows of people, but with a presence that I can physically feel. It makes me think I was in contact with something back there. I just don't know what it was. My sighting happened in December of 2000 in Arizona. I will always remember the timing of it because the news was dominated by the contested presidential election between George Bush and Al Gore, and the whole country was on edge. That was actually one of the reasons I got out of town for a few days, because I used to get too wrapped up in politics and needed some nature therapy. When this happened, I was by myself and hiking the Bell Trail south of Sedona. It was my first time on that trail, and I did it on a weekday, so I don't think I ran into more than 10 people. The weather had been perfect too, with clear skies and temperatures in the upper 50s. I was walking at a fairly relaxed pace since it's not a very difficult hike, and had stopped at a big rock off trail that had a pretty incredible view. The reason I stopped was to sit in the sun for a little bit and focus on being in the present. I do this a lot when I hike as kind of a reset, and I love listening to what's around me. I sat on the rock for about half an hour before noticing something in the sky that very quickly got my attention. It had been a bright sunny day, and I really didn't interpret what I was seeing as an object at first, since it looked like part of the sky. I thought it was a thin cloud coming in because the color of it matched the sky so closely that it was difficult to separate the two visually. It only took watching it for a couple of minutes, and I could tell it was slowly moving, coming in from the east and following the trail west toward me. Since I could see it moving, I was pretty sure it wasn't an optical illusion and something had to physically be there. I was still thinking a cloud though. I watched it get closer, and gradually I could see more of a defined shape as well as what looked like a few other colors inside of it. The most accurate comparison I've been able to come up with is that it resembled a large polished chunk of opal moving through the air. Overall, it was mostly light blue, which made it really blend in with the sky, but in the center of it were small pockets of yellow and orange and a hint of green. The colors inside weren't static either. They were subtly changing and reflecting differently in the sun. I stood up on the rock and grabbed my backpack for some reason. I don't really know why I did that. I think I was feeling like I might need to jump back on the trail, but this thing had my undivided attention, and based on the way it was moving, I thought it was going to pass directly over me if I stayed there long enough. I started to wonder if it was the top part of a hot air balloon that had separated from the basket, or possibly a big piece of plastic that had blown away from somewhere because of how smoothly it was moving through the air. It had that same look of floating with the wind. It also wasn't making any noise or changing direction, so I figured it had to be something very lightweight. I remember looking around for other people on the trail, but at that moment I was the only one there. As it continued to move toward me, I was trying to gauge how high up the thing was. My best guess, which could be way off, was somewhere in the range of 500 to 800 feet off the ground. I've stood at the base of Bell Rock in Sedona many times, and I believe that's around 500 feet tall. This object looked to be similar to that height, or maybe slightly higher. It got to a point where I knew it was going to pass over me, and I could easily see it had an actual surface. I could also confirm that the internal colors I'd seen before were definitely there and inside of it. What didn't make sense is that they were pulsing rhythmically like a metronome. There were no lines or seams on it like a hot air balloon would have, and no real structure to it. It really did look like a giant piece of opal the size of a house just floating through the air, and it was kind of taking my breath away. I didn't know what I was looking at, but I knew it didn't look like anything else I've ever seen. I couldn't help but focus on these bizarre colors inside of it because they were pulsing in a steady pattern of twos where they would quickly get more vibrant twice in a row. Then there'd be a small pause and they would pulse 2 more times. For some reason, I assumed the pulsing had something to do with how it was staying in the air. I was a little stunned though, and I can't say I was thinking that clearly. As this thing made its way directly over me, I had a powerful and immediate realization that it was not man-made. This was not a conclusion I had reasoned my way into. It was purely on instinct because of how unfamiliar and non-mechanical it was. I want to say it looked organic in a way. It was the dictionary definition of a UFO or UAP because I could not for the life of me identify what it was. At that moment, when it was straight overhead, my adrenaline kicked in and I became acutely aware of my own heartbeat. It came in a wave and I could feel and almost hear my heart pumping in my chest and my ears. It was in that split second that I noticed something so unbelievable it's hard to even talk about sometimes because it makes me emotional. The rhythm of the pulsing colors inside of this object very noticeably changed and synchronized with my heartbeat. They were still going in patterns of 2, but they got much faster and perfectly matched the beats I was feeling in my chest. Every single time I felt my heart pump blood, it corresponded directly with the visual pulses inside of the object. When I became aware of this, my heart started beating even faster due to the sheer absurdity of the situation. It was the most incredible feeling I've ever experienced, and I felt physically connected to it, while at the same time having no clue what was happening. It didn't take long for the object to pass over me, so I'm sure only seconds went by. But when it got to the other side of me, it seemed to move upward and away, taking a slightly different path than it had been on. During this time, I felt a strong sense that it was aware of my presence, and as weird as this sounds, I felt like whatever it was aligned with me very briefly on a deep biological level before continuing on its path. It continued floating down the canyon and stayed visible for a while longer, but since it had changed direction, it got almost impossible for me to keep tracking with the angle of the midday sun in the sky. I would guess that at a mile or so away from me, I lost it. I was speechless as I watched it float away and lost all connection with time passing or where I was. I could not believe what had just happened. I think it's so incredible that what I saw never seemed to have any kind of acceleration or deceleration. It looked to me like it was effortlessly drifting the entire time. There were no flashing lights, and I never heard the hint of a sound come from it. When it was all over, I stood there in the desert, totally alone. I attempted to continue my hike afterward, but I couldn't focus on anything, so I ended up turning around and going back to my car. The experience had completely overridden any other interest, and the only thing I wanted to do was drive home, and that's what I did. When I got there that afternoon, I sat my wife down and described every detail to her, repeating myself at least a few times in a row. I lost sleep for days afterward too because it affected me so much. I wrote everything I could remember on paper because I did not want the details to fade or change over time, and I also attempted to sketch the object, but it was an impossible thing to draw. If you want a visual, just look up polished opal because that's very close to what it looked like. I don't think a single day has gone by where I haven't thought about this, and I'm still as clueless now as I was the day it happened. I couldn't even guess where it came from or what its purpose was. I believe I witnessed it completely by chance, and I most likely had no part in what it was doing. However, the synchronization between its internal colors pulsing and my heartbeat is still the most significant aspect of the whole experience. It matched so perfectly that it rules out any kind of coincidence, in my opinion. It responded instantly to the changes in my heart rate, especially when it increased, and it left me with this feeling of connection that I've never forgotten. That brief synchronization makes me think that two separate life forms, very different from one another, were momentarily connected that day. Not through communication or language, but through biology and rhythm. And even though it only lasted seconds, it left a lifelong impression on me. I had the craziest and most unexplainable thing happen when I was in the 6th grade, and my best friend at the time was with me during the whole thing. Our class was on a field trip at the Brandywine Zoo in Wilmington, Delaware, and they split us up into 3 groups, each with a chaperone. I was in the same group as my friend, and his mom was our chaperone. I remember being happy about that because she was a single mom and kind of a free-spirit hippie, and she always let us do whatever we wanted. For the first part of the trip, all the groups walked around the zoo together taking notes in a worksheet we had to fill out, and that lasted maybe an hour. When we were done with that, everyone went to an amphitheater area for lunch. This amphitheater had these longer terraced steps with short concrete walls on each side, and my friend and I sat next to one of the walls to eat. Then, and I don't know where he came from, this kid we had never seen before walked up and asked if he could sit with us for lunch. We said yes without really thinking about it because we were kids, but we knew right away he didn't go to our school and wasn't part of our class trip. I'm sure he told us his name at some point, but I have never remembered it. After a few minutes of eating and talking, baseball came up because that's all we used to care about back then. This kid kept trying to jump in, but it was obvious he didn't actually know anything about baseball. He didn't know the players we were talking about, and he'd say things that made no sense. We didn't care that he didn't follow it like we did. It was just something we noticed. Still, even though he was a little awkward, he was really friendly and we got along great with him. He ended up staying with us the entire break. When lunch was over, the teachers broke us apart into our smaller groups for this scavenger hunt we were doing. Each group had a printed map of the zoo and a checklist of animals and random objects we were supposed to find. I don't know why, but the kid from lunch just stayed with us and joined our group for the scavenger hunt, and I don't think anyone cared or even asked who he was. I know my friend's mom didn't question it, and if she did, we never heard her say anything. I feel like someone should have noticed that we had an extra person tagging along, but I guess times were different then. Right before the scavenger hunt started, we got a bathroom break at the main restrooms in the middle of the zoo. While the 3 of us were in the boys' bathroom, my friend and I asked him where his parents were or who he was with. I distinctly remember him telling us they weren't anywhere and that he was at the zoo alone for a project. That was literally the only thing he said about it. There was no explanation or follow-up. He was just there alone at 12 years old. It was weird hearing him say that, but not weird enough for either of us to question it, and we were young, so I don't think we realized how odd that was. While we were running around and checking things off our list, this kid started acting like he was seeing animals for the first time. I don't mean that in a normal, excited way like he'd never been to the zoo before. It was over the top, and he was amazed by every single one. He kept asking questions that felt like common knowledge, too. My friend and I were laughing about it because we thought he was doing it on purpose and trying to be funny. He was a very strange kid, but at the time, we thought it was hilarious. When all of our groups had finished the scavenger hunt, everyone met back at this big rock wall that said Brandywine Zoo on it. The teachers wanted to get a class photo with all of us in front of it, so everybody lined up at the sign with the teachers and chaperones against the wall and all of us kids in front of them. My friend and I were walking to one side to be together all the way on the end, and since that kid was still hanging around, we told him to come over and get into the picture with us, and that's exactly what he did. Someone from the zoo had the camera and told everybody to smile, then took the picture. It was one single photo, no retakes, and the whole thing probably took less than 2 minutes. Right after that, we said goodbye to our new friend and got on the bus to go back to school. As we were walking onto the bus, we had been the first in line, and I remember moving toward the far back seats. As soon as my friend and I took one of the farthest 2 benches, we looked out the back bus window and saw that kid walking away with 2 adult men. There was one on each side of him, and they both had a hand on his back like they were escorting him somewhere. The weird part about this was that the 2 men were wearing uniforms, but we couldn't tell what they were for. They were black and exactly the same, and they didn't look even remotely like the zoo employee uniforms. The only thing we could think of was that he had gotten in trouble for being there alone and they were taking him away. That doesn't make any sense to me now, but it was what we thought back then. While we were waiting for everyone else to get on the bus, we watched the 2 men walk him along the fence and actually take him out of the zoo like they were leaving with him. After that field trip was over, we completely forgot about the zoo and the kid, and I probably wouldn't have thought about either one of them ever again. Then a few weeks went by, and one morning I walked into class and the first thing I saw was a big printed photo thumbtacked to the bulletin board on the wall. It was the class photo from the zoo trip, and it had to be around an 8x10 print because it was pretty big. I walked over to look at it as soon as I saw it, mostly just to find myself and my friend. Then I spotted us right away on the end of the group and standing in front of my friend's mom. There was one major issue with the picture though. The kid we had hung out with for half of the day was not in the photo. It was only my friend and me standing there. He was not between us like he had been when they took it. There was even a small amount of empty space where he should have been standing. I very clearly remember the feeling I got when I saw this. It was a mixture of confusion and shock and maybe a little fear because it didn't seem possible. I knew then and still know now without any doubt that he had been between us when the picture was taken. I also know that it would be impossible for a picture to exist that only had my friend and me in it because we never actually did that. The 2 of us had never stood together by ourselves. When they had taken the picture, the 3 of us got into position at the same time, and once it was taken, everyone walked away. There is no way he couldn't have been in it. I stared at that photo on the wall for so long, and when my friend showed up, he was just as freaked out and confused as I was. We couldn't talk about it in class, but after school we both went to his house and told his mom exactly what had happened. She only vaguely remembered us sitting in a group during lunch, but really had no idea who we were talking about. It was like this kid didn't even exist, and trying to explain it was impossible. I could not understand how someone who was physically standing next to us didn't appear in the picture. This has been a lifelong mystery and the only unexplainable thing that's ever happened to me. I've had many people tell me it was a ghost, and that's usually the first response I get when I tell the story. I don't think it was paranormal, and maybe that's because I experienced it in real life, but he was a real living person. He ate with us and walked around with us, and he had a real body with tangible clothing on. I also think the reason my friend's mom doesn't remember him is because the zoo was chaotic and there were kids everywhere. There are 2 reasons I believe the kid we met had to be something else, and quite possibly not even human. First was the way he was escorted out by 2 men in uniform. That wasn't normal, and it gives me a very Men in Black alien vibe. And second, of course, is the fact he didn't show up in the class picture. And you have to remember, this was a long time ago. That picture was taken on a film camera, not some digital image that could have been edited or photoshopped. We didn't even see the print on the wall for weeks after the field trip because the teacher had to get it developed. The whole thing just seems so impossible to me. I don't know who it was we met or where he came from, and I definitely don't know why he chose to spend half the day with us. I only know that I'm at a total loss, and I've never been able to explain any part of it. I want to thank everyone for watching another episode of Skywatcher Stories. If you like hearing these personal experiences of strange sightings and alien encounters, please subscribe because I upload new episodes every week and it really helps the channel. Until next time, keep watching the skies